Deep in the California desert, 125,000 American citizens lined up for over an hour in brutal heat, waiting for a dinner bell to ring. When it finally did, they shuffled into unfinished mess halls with no roofs, sat down at long tables, and stared at plates of beef tongue still covered in taste buds. This wasn't a prison for criminals. These were teachers, farmers, shopkeepers. Their crime? Being Japanese. And the food they were forced to eat tells a story of survival that history books conveniently left out. In 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. With one signature, he gave Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt the power to remove anyone of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast. Didn't matter if you were born in America, didn't matter if you'd never even been to Japan. If you looked Japanese, you were going to a camp. Families got a few days' notice. Take what you can carry. A couple bags of clothes and bedding. Everything else? Gone. No trial, no due process. Just gone. They called these places reception centers, which is a nice way of saying prison camps built on land nobody wanted. Swamps in Arkansas, deserts in California, places so harsh that the government thought only desperate people could make them work. Before we continue, subscribe to my channel for more mind-blowing insights and forgotten moments from World War II. The first 84 people who arrived at Manzanar sat in a mess hall with one working stove. 1. They ate canned army rations, the kind soldiers complained about overseas. Within a month, that same camp was feeding 7,000 people 3 meals a day across 10 mess halls. The ideal food budget? Just 45 cents per person per day. Think about that. You couldn't buy a decent sandwich today for 45 cents, but back then, it was supposed to cover breakfast, lunch and dinner, and the quality matched the price. Cooks were untrained volunteers at first, people who'd never cooked for more than their own families, suddenly responsible for feeding hundreds. Food quality swung wildly depending on which mess hall you got assigned to. Some camps handed out mess cards to keep people from seeking out the better cooks. You were stuck with whatever your assigned cook could manage. And what they managed was often brutal. Beef tongue served with the skin still on. Lamb and mutton so pungent that inmates universally hated it. The smell alone could turn your stomach. So cooks got creative. They deep-fried the lamb, doused it in sauce, and served it as sweet and sour pork. Disguising unpopular ingredients became a survival skill. Then there were the ingredients nobody asked for: apple butter, sauerkraut, meatloaf. For the Issei, the first-generation immigrants who grew up eating rice and fish, this Western food was completely foreign. Imagine being 60 years old, ripped from your home, and forced to eat potatoes and spaghetti every single day. Hot dogs became so common that people grew sick of them. Spam appeared at almost every meal. And then someone invented Weenie Royale, a dish made with hot dogs or Vienna sausages mixed with eggs. Sounds terrible, right? But it became a lasting part of Japanese-American cuisine because when you're that desperate, you make it work. The ingredients tell their own horror story. Imitation cheddar cheese made with oil instead of real dairy. Government cheese, the lowest quality stuff available. And speaking of money, inmates had to buy canteen items with wages from camp jobs. Teachers and cooks made maybe $14 to $18 per month. That's it. So when the canteen sold Cracker Jack or canned tuna, most people couldn't afford them. Canned tuna was considered precious because access was so rare. Most people didn't even have ovens. They had pot-belly stoves for heat, not cooking. But here's where the story gets interesting. These camps were built on the assumption that Japanese Americans would just accept their fate. The government didn't count on resistance, and food became the tool for that resistance. Inmates secretly brewed sake in the mess halls, even though alcohol was strictly banned. A teenager at Heart Mountain wrote in their diary about a neighbor getting jailed for making rice wine. Why risk it? Because making sake was an act of defiance, a way to hold on to culture when everything else was being erased. Gardens and farms sprouted up across the camps. Manzanar grew 440 acres of crops. They planted orchards with 1,000 fruit trees. They grew so many watermelons, cabbages and turnips that they shipped surplus to other camps. Carrots and chili peppers were grown in such massive quantities they were sold on the open market. Think about that. People imprisoned by their own government were growing food so efficiently that they were competing with free farmers. The camps had beehives for honey, chicken ranches, and hog farms. Food waste from mess halls became pig feed. They even used mules that only responded to commands in Japanese because that's who was working the fields. This wasn't casual gardening. This was full-scale agricultural production happening inside prison camps. And it worked so well that by 1944 there was a massive rice shortage. Why? Because inmates were using extra rice to make mochi for New Year's celebrations. Mochitsuki, the traditional pounding of steamed rice into mochi, became a major community event. George Takei, who was a child in the camps, remembered the rhythmic pounding of mochi in hollowed-out tree stumps. Elders sang traditional songs while younger people swung large mallets, turning steamed rice into sticky, sweet mochi. This wasn't just food. This was culture surviving in the worst possible conditions. Meanwhile, outside the camps, rumors spread that Japanese Americans were being coddled with extra sugar and beef. Total lies. Eleanor Roosevelt visited the Gila River camp to see for herself. She wrote that the camps had to follow the same national rationing laws as everyone else. She also wrote something that cuts deep. To undo a mistake is always harder than not to create one originally. She knew what was happening was wrong. But by then, 125,000 people were already locked up. As the war dragged on, food quality got worse. Younger workers started leaving the camps near the end of the war. The Food Fancies recipe column in the Topaz Times, written by Evelyn Kimura, disappeared by 1944. Rice started showing up with jello, ketchup, or canned apricots. Desserts like rice pudding or pie became rare treats. Food was the primary point of contention and comfort in camp life. It was where people fought back against dehumanization. When you can't control where you live or when you leave, you control what you eat. You brew sake in secret. You grow vegetables that remind you of home. You pound mochi with your community and teach your children the songs your grandparents taught you. The government could take your freedom, but they couldn't take your recipes. The Manzanar National Historic Site preserves this history now. George Takei wrote a children's book called My Lost Freedom about his experience. But for decades, this story was buried. People didn't want to talk about how America imprisoned its own citizens based on race alone. They definitely didn't want to talk about the food, because food reveals the truth. Bad food means bad conditions, and the conditions were savage. So the next time someone tells you that internment camps weren't that bad, ask them about the beef tongue with taste buds still attached. Ask them about 45 cents per person per day. Ask them about families who turned swampland and desert into working farms just to survive. Food doesn't lie. And the food in these camps tells a story of systematic cruelty dressed up as national security. If this story changed how you see World War II history, hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten moments that textbooks left out. Share this with someone who thinks they know everything about the war. Because the real story of survival isn't just about battles and bombs. Sometimes it's about hot dogs, sake and mochi made in the shadow of guard towers.